Well, I don't think it's an explicit example. I think there are a lot of Victorians, families stuck at home getting very frustrated. But unfortunately, this is the standard that the Premier Daniel Andrews has ultimately set. Earlier in the lockdown, he allowed the Black Lives Matter protest to go forward and didn't stump on that and make it clear that we were all taking a big hit for trying to contain the spread of COVID-19. We understand since then there have obviously been some outbreaks, and so people unfortunately aren't taking the rules as seriously, and this is the standard he's prepared to walk past.
Well, now you're getting the financial cost. We've seen some of the figures come out today, Tim, announced by the Treasurer earlier. How alarmed are you at those figures? How surprised are you as well, bearing in mind that some 60% of people in Victoria are still going to need government help right up until the end of the March quarter next year, and that accounts for basically most of the country.
Well, it's disturbing, and I don't think anybody would argue otherwise. We want the economy back on its feet and people be able to go and live out their lives. We have to deal with the pandemic and constraining the outbreak as well. That's why clarity is so important for a road out. This is a point that Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has made, which is providing a clarity about how we're going to get out of the situation we're presently in. Because instead, the state government is only seeking to extend its powers to keep lockdowns in place. So, of course, there's no business investment, no jobs growth, and no opportunity for young Victorians to be able to rebuild their lives. And that's the problem we all face. And
there's still no real talk yet of an exit plan coming out of Victoria, coming out of these restrictions. In your view, what should an exit plan look like?
Well, I think you've got to do it based on a series of principled approaches around what measures are going to be introduced and relaxed based on caseload numbers, obviously, of new infections, but also looking at when do we need targeted measures for particular regions rather than just putting the whole of Melbourne and really these days the whole of Victoria in lockdown, when we know that there are actually targeted areas where there are particular communities that are affected. Now, that isn't to demonise those communities. It's a simple acknowledgement that we have to have a pathway. If a community within a certain geographic area has no cases, that we can progressively release some of the obligations so people can get back on their feet.
Aren't we seeing, though, at the moment that the federal government is really powerless to be able to interfere what's going on with the states at the moment, because Daniel Andrews calling the shots, Anastasia Palaszczuk calling shots? It's almost as if the tail's wagging the dog here.
Well, no, we're a federation and we're a country built on states. Everyone thinks states don't matter. We've suddenly realised they really, really do matter. Now, I always knew that, and they're the ones who have the power. What we have the capacity to do is obviously try and get states to work cooperatively together. So even though none of us are particularly big fans of the border closure between New South Wales and Victoria was a cooperative arrangement versus what's happened in some other parts of the country. And our job as federal government is to support people through this difficult time. But the states have to pick up some of the tab too. We've spent overwhelmingly much more money in supporting the economy and jobs in Victoria, and the state needs to pick up their fair share.
But what we're seeing now is this clash between the health response and the economic response.
I wouldn't say it's a clash, but obviously there's a tension. If the health response keeps going, then it just incurs bigger and bigger cost. And this is why you should never look at an issue through a singular lens. We have the issues of COVID-19 that are very important around constraining it. There are issues around mental health and other types of issues around elective surgery and the like, which are also very important. We also have jobs and making sure Australians can support themselves. And so when you look at things through just one lens, you ignore everything else and deprioritise it. And I think we in Canberra take a more balanced approach.
OK, well, when it comes to the economic response, there's a couple of pointers here. I mean, first of all, it does seem as though we've spoken about this several times when it comes to this. The super rise that was due to begin next year, it does seem like that's being walked back now and that might be a way off. Is that how you're seeing it?
Well, there's no announcement that's been made, but obviously there was a report today on an online website for academics where the overwhelming majority of economists made the point that it would come at the cost of economic growth and wages. And so I think where we're focused here in Canberra is how do we get Australians back into jobs? How do we create the opportunity for the next generation of Australians? And if it's just going to be and we're going to have to look at every measure and every lever about how we're going to achieve that. But increasing the cost of working and making it harder to employ people is not part of that solution.
And on to tax cuts. I mean, the Treasurer said in the program earlier that they are still working through some tax options. I noticed the AIG is calling for tax cuts to be brought in earlier. The scheduled tax cuts from 2022, Innes Willox want them to be brought in from January 1 next year. Is that possible?
Well, these sorts of things that obviously the Treasurer is looking through as part of the budget process and making sure that we consider all options. But ultimately, we've got to make sure we need to do what we can to stimulate the economy to get people back into jobs. And of course, tax is a critical part of that, particularly to bring forward investment so that we can grow the economy so young Australians can get jobs.
Just on a foreign interference, Tim, the government now holding an inquiry into foreign interference at our universities, or some of them anyways. Is that something that you support?
Well, I'm a member of the committee that's going to be doing it, and I'm looking forward to the inquiry. It will be a very good opportunity to investigate what is going on, making sure that universities are going through the proper process and making sure they're not becoming a soft target for foreign interference.
Were you surprised at some of the allegations, though, that were identified last week, that basically China's paying off researchers at our universities and then taking back the intellectual property?
Well, I can't say that I was surprised, but it's always confronting to see it in writing, and that's exactly what we need to be investigating, is making sure that Australian universities are pursuing the interests of obviously our nation, but the pursuit of knowledge, not becoming harvested by foreign interference and foreign interests, and taking our research and technology to other countries where we don't have access to it. So they were very confronting allegations, and that's exactly what this inquiry, which I call for as well, is seeking to address.
Well, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but if the inquiry finds that, this is true and this is actually happening, what is the end game here?
Well, I think we don't want to prejudge, but obviously there will be legislative responses and an expectation, I would have thought, that universities lift their game and more properly scrutinise what's happening. And you've seen with the federal government, not just in this space, but obviously in a new clearinghouse around treaties and agreements struck between state governments and foreign governments, the Morrison government is going to stand up for Australia's national interest, and we expect the institutions, whether government or universities, to do the same. So
have universities been failing up until this point?
Well, obviously there are allegations that are being made. There are institutes like Confucius Institutes. There's obviously research and development programs and the allegations there. So let's wait and see. I don't want to prejudge what's going to come through the inquiry, but I can assure you it will be very heavily scrutinised sector.